Hi everyone, welcome to our fourth episode in our webinar series Zero Trust Club. We're going to be talking about compliance in this episode. My name is Tarun Desikan. I'm the EVP of Cloud Secure Edge at SonicWall, which is SonicWall's Zero Trust offering. I'm joined today by Aaron Coleman, the founder of Singular Security. Aaron, do you want to perhaps introduce yourself and then we can get going?
Sure. Hey, Tarun, thanks. I'm Aaron Coleman. I'm a founder, also the acting president and COO of Singular Security. My role really is a in between the vendors and the clients, and we try to align our value streams. That's really what I do, is allow value streams to solutions for clients' priorities. We work with the mid-market predominantly, and it's really horizontal across all industries: public, private, federal, state, local. And anybody that's looking for a compliance driven initiative support, Singular Security will be there to help them.
Aaron, how did you get started? How did you start getting into compliance?
Well, it's been a long journey. We started back in 2005, and I've been in the industry almost 30 years. I hate saying that, but the whole background was around helping organizations really meet their objectives. And with Singular Security, it's always been around compliance risk management. So customers that really are looking to retain business would come to us and say, hey, we're getting a lot of these questionnaires. It really started around vendor risk management, and we don't know how to answer these things. And so it kind of developed from there, identifying really their baselines, looking at what they have in place, and then establishing their initiative, whether it was compliance driven, industry related. That's kind of where it came, is just really around the compliance and risk management.
Awesome. All right. So just a little bit of logistics before we get started. For folks who are not familiar with the BrightTalk system, you can ask questions at any time just using the tabs in your on your screen. We will have this session recorded as well. Any attachments, any questions you can download later on, and please share, provide your feedback. Just engage with us as we get going. I'm going to kick off a poll here. So while we keep chatting, please let us know what type of compliance you are most interested in. We're going to be, between Aaron and I, we're going to be talking about a bunch of different frameworks. So when you have a minute, just click on the poll and let us know what you're most interested in. And so before we get really into the subject, I just wanted to address, when people say compliance, they can mean so many different things. And in this session, we are primarily going to talk about three kind of different types of compliance that I see. So first is industry regulations. If you are an organization doing payments, actually that's the first poll question as well, is PCI compliance, payment card industry compliance, becomes very important. If you're in the healthcare space, the compliance framework is HIPAA. If you're in the education space, Child Internet Protection Act, CIPA becomes important. If you're a utility, there's an infrastructure protection regulation out there. And similarly, if you're servicing, if you're a subcontractor to a government entity, CMMC. So basically, these industry regulations have come historically either because of data breaches or other well-known incidents where the regulators or the government has gotten together and said, hey, listen, if you're going to work in this industry, you need to follow these specific compliance standards. There are other types of security standards that are more general, not specific to a given industry, SOC 2, ISO, there might be others as well. And these are more general, if you're a service provider, if you're a technology organization, you have to meet these kinds of standards. Oftentimes your customers will ask you to meet these standards. And one common factor between all the standards I have up here is that it typically involves an audit. Every year or so, you have to have often an external audit. Sometimes it could be an internal audit, but oftentimes it's an external audit where you have to hire a prominent firm or a qualified auditor to come in, look at your systems and say yes, and they'll have to attest to it. There are, of course, other types of compliance as well. NIST is a government standard. CIS is a non-profit in the cybersecurity space. And of course, there are cyber insurance providers. All of these organizations also provide specific frameworks and guidelines that an organization has to meet. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about compliance broadly, and then when we have an opportunity, we'll dive into kind of the specific firms. So Aaron, the poll is all, we can let it run a little bit further, but it looks like PCI is top of mind in the poll. That seems to be the most common topic that folks are interested in. That's great, because PCI is something I think you're very familiar with. Anything to add before I move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I think with this is a great, broad list for many of the regulations we work with in the various industries. PCI is a very large one. I don't think there's many companies that don't take credit cards, and there's a lot of implications there when there is a breach or some type of incident. And then when you look at the guidelines, those are very important as well, because there's industries out there. For instance, we work with like insurance companies, and sometimes these companies, they don't really understand that there's implications or guidance. For instance, insurance companies are under CISA's financial sector critical infrastructure, right, and they give you that guideline for NIST. So a lot of times companies will not necessarily know that. It's important to go back, understand really where you play, and it will help you find the right framework, whether it's a regulatory requirement or just best practice.
Maybe that's a good topic to talk about. Like, how do I, as an organization, think about my security versus the compliance that I need to achieve? Is it the same thing? Is it different? Are they at odds with each other?
Not at all at odds. It really depends on what you're thinking about when you're thinking about reaching for compliance, and if that really meets security. There's many auditors that I work with, and these could be QSAs, they could be our internal CISOs, and they have this contrary view of security and compliance, because they feel that if companies go through and are completely compliant and really compliant, then they could be secure. But if they do some of the security things only, they're not necessarily compliant. And so it's really coming around governance that I think is the overlaying factor there, right? Because people will look at security and say, well, I've implemented the firewall, I've done microsegmentation. My endpoints have all the security controls that I put on their EDR or whatever. But what are they doing to manage their vulnerability management program? For instance, with PCI, you have the requirement to have a vulnerability analysis done every 30 days, if we're looking at the SAQD. And within that, any critical or high finding, you have to patch it within 30 days. Mm-hmm. And so it gives this frequency or this mode of operation where you have to know that the requirement of the compliance is to show under audit that you're actually doing these things, right? And so that's really a key distinction is, I think, when companies are secure, they may forget that you have to maintain it and manage it within the policies that a compliance regulation will dictate or drive.
So maybe that's a good topic to dive a little deeper. So what does a security program look like versus what does a compliance program look like? Are they the same or are they different?
They could be complementary in a lot of ways, because let's say if you decide to go with an ISMS, which is Information Security Management System, a designation a lot of times given by ISO 27000, and you become ISO accredited, you could be not necessarily compliant. And the reason being is that if your controls inside of your ISO framework aren't as stringent as the compliance regulation requires you to be, let's say, for instance, you're doing HIPAA, and let's say for whatever reason HIPAA has an 8-character password requirement, and ISO only requires you to have 7, then you're not compliant with HIPAA's requirement. What you want to do is go with the most stringent control in order for it to be compliant across all your requirements. So when you look at ISO, there is applicability requirements, and that's where you would put your compliance requirements. So many organizations will want to go after kind of like an ISO framework or a SOC 2, and that way they could under audit quickly go and show everybody they're doing the right thing. However, in order to be compliant, they need to put the applicable frameworks and cross-correlate those controls just to make sure they're meeting all the objectives.
So I'll tell you our experience, at least, I've been doing this for 15, 20 years, is in my organizations, we always try to go be secure first. So being in the industry, some best practices that you must have, right? You must have endpoint security. You must have a SOC that is look at the signals from the endpoint security. You have to have network security, identity security. So you go set up the security best practices. And then when a compliance requirement comes in, you try to map what you already have to the compliance requirements, identify the gaps. And it's like this continuous loop. And maybe it takes 1, 2, 3 cycles. It does take a time, and it does take effort and does take cost. And then the loop becomes tight. But there's always some gaps, and you have to keep addressing those gaps.
Always going to be a gap, and it's part of the training that we do with our customer base is embrace the fact that you're actually starting. I used this analogy earlier, and it was about the gym, right? Mm-hmm. And anybody that wants to get into the gym, and they're not habitually working out, but they're for whatever reason wanting to do it. The most important aspect is doing it. You have to get into the gym. You have to be there, 2 days a week, 15, 30 minutes, whatever you can commit to. And over time, you're going to see it, grow. Ideally, you'll be there 4 days a week, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it takes. And then after that time, a person will be inclined to want to work on, some targeted areas, whether it's their shoulders or their pecs or whatever, right? Their abs. And that's what a security program really is. It's about getting started. The most important aspect of any program is to really understand and assess your baseline, understand those gaps, have a roadmap of where you're going. And then prioritize those biggest gaps. You don't want to be low-hanging fruit. That's the worst thing you can be. So security is important in that aspect. Prioritizing your largest gaps, ensuring you're not going to be in an incident, and then strengthening and really working on efficiencies, automations, and things that make it easier to maintain. It takes a couple years. It really does, because you're not going to be great at it. You just accept the fact that it's a hard thing. And over time, we see where, like, one client I've had for over 15 years, we started with their service provider. They do a technology, multiple industries, different regulations. It was a lot of binders. It was a lot of, kind of sourcing through policies and giving them to the auditors. And now it's one person with one documentation, their portal, and they're highly organized, efficient. And it took a number of years for them to get there. And so
we have a few questions coming in, Peter and team. We will get to them in a bit. I see your questions. Just for you, Aaron. So imagine I'm starting from zero and I need to get PCI compliant. What is the effort and cost you're talking about here? Just if you could be a little bit specific, like what do you think it will take?
Well, the effort, it's one of the things that, with us, we understand every client. It doesn't matter industry size, they're all unique. Everybody's going to have a different level of resource availability and capability or understanding of what the objective is, in a different culture. And so once we get through some of those things, we really want to start with the baseline. You got to understand what your footprint is. And then once you understand that scope, you try to reduce the scope. So, an instance, we have a client recently, as a toll road. that was implicated in a service provider audit. They had to be service provider level 1, report on compliance with the QSA. Total blindside to them. And it came at a time where, they had a lot of just rearranged processes. And one of the biggest factors that was implicating them is that they were still taking paper written down mail-in forms with credit card numbers on them. Right. And once we got rid of that whole process, their whole scope reduced tremendously. As a matter of fact, it took them out of the whole service provider category and put them back into a merchant with like the least, because everything they did was in the cloud. So for any organization, the cost is really about the first assessment. And then after that, it's understanding what your appetite can actually, take on. You want to get rid of those highest priorities and then work on everything else. And you should be able to cost contain each of those and understand them as you take them on.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat. Peter mentions one on SOC 2 audits. SOC 2 is a compliance framework for service provider organizations. Typically, SaaS companies will do SOC 2, and it establishes to anyone buying your services that you have good operational standards, you have good cybersecurity standards, you have service level agreements, and so on. And he's absolutely right that there are different levels of SOC 2. There's SOC 2 type 1, type 2, and so on. And type 1 is a self-audit. Mm-hmm. It's an honor system. What are your thoughts? And PCI has that as well. PCI has multiple levels as well. The lowest level is an honor system. So a lot of these auditing frameworks have an honor system where you can, and in his case, they just outright lied. They just seems like they put a bunch of bunkum. Have you seen this? What are your thoughts on folks who just kind of lie to get their compliance, get the checkbox?
Yeah, so it's important. That's a great point that Peter makes, is that you got it really depends on your organization. So if you have implications, like if I'm a highly regulated organization and I'm going to choose to work with a service provider, and this happens all the time. We look at different vendors, different portals, and one of the first questions I ask is, where's your security standard? What framework do you attain, your security audits from? And I look for things that are heavily audited. If they're self-assessed, I'm very suspicious about what it is. Now, if it's not necessarily going to impact my business, it's going to be something, maybe it's just a marketing person using that portal to create marketing content, and they have nothing to do with regulation, then I would allow that to be. If it's something to be within my regulated data, I wouldn't touch it, because when you're looking at vendor management for every company, you got to think about your supply chain. And if there's the weak link in your supply chain, that actually reflects on your environment, and you can't do it. Yeah,
I agree. I feel like if you're dealing with fairly immature immature security organizations on the other side, they will take self-attestation. But as soon as you start dealing with even a slightly sophisticated procurement organization, a slightly sophisticated security team that's aware of risk, they're not just going to take your checkbox self-certification. They're going to ask to see your list of controls. They're going to ask to see your service level agreement. They're going to ask you a few questions. And listen, if you just lied about the stuff in your SOC 2, that stuff shows up very, very quickly. It just does. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you can lie in a very sophisticated manner. I feel like these things show up very quickly if you don't do a good job on them.
You have to be very careful, especially in regulations like HIPAA, where the fines get more steep once they do the incident review. Because if somebody is attesting to be HIPAA compliant over the years and there's an incident, and under audit, they identify that all of those times that they had submitted their standard or their posture report that they lied, then the fines take up to a different level, and they're more severe. And so I think that's a good motivator for most companies that are in a regulated industry to understand what are the implications if I'm breached? And what if I'm not compliant?
Yeah.
Right? Are they gonna be more heavy-handed when it comes to fines? And then those are the things you have to be careful of.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So I see a few more questions coming in. So let's move a little bit further ahead. One thing I just want to talk about a little bit, the topic of this webinar is zero trust. So let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about what is zero trust security and how it might help some of your compliance initiatives. So just a quick recap for folks who may not be fully familiar with zero trust security. So zero trust security zero trust is a buzzword, I'll admit it, but it has some basic fundamental points. When we say zero trust, there are 4 attributes we're talking about. First is authentication. A core concept in zero trust is that you explicitly authenticate and authorize every request. So no static credentials, no implicit trust. Hey, if I'm in the office, I can access this web application. None of that stuff. You always have to be authenticated and authorized before you access a resource. That's one of the fundamental principles of zero trust. A second principle is device trust. The reality is, in the old days, if you were on premise, you could access resources and that was fine. But the reality today is most people take our laptops home. We're accessing things from coffee shops. So in addition to proving you are the user who you are, we really believe you need to attest to the device that you're coming from. So if your device is not an approved device, you don't get access. The third attribute of zero trust security is access policy. So by default, you don't get access to anything. It's only after you authenticate, establish your trusted device, and you meet the access policy that says, hey, it's me on this device. I get access to this application. Do you get access? And finally, web filtering, where we understand that most threats today come from the internet. And so you evaluate the types of websites, the types of risks, and then you block anything that's deemed malicious. So that's kind of the core attributes of zero trust security. And SonicWall, the sponsor of this webinar, has a zero trust security offering called Cloud Secure Edge. It's available across all your platforms, desktop, mobile. If you have users who can't install those, we have clientless options. A zero trust security solution should be integrated with everything in your organization already, your identity provider, your endpoint security, your device managers, and so forth. And finally, any security solution needs to be on 24/7. Right? The bad guys, tend to perform their attacks on Sunday at 3 a.m. That's when they like to do it. And so you need to be ready to respond, mitigate, and remediate in real time. And so those are kind of the core concepts of zero trust security. Peter also had a question on multi-factor authentication. How does multi-factor authentication and credential compromise fit in here? Or are you reliant on third-party solutions? I'll just tell you, credential compromise today is probably the #1 attack vector. So we're talking about compliance here, but where the rubber meets the road with compliance is when you actually get attacked. And even though you're fully compliant, you get breached. And 90% of the time, actually the statistics about 83%, it's to do with user credential compromise. And so strong authentication is a core part. So SonicWall is not an authentication provider. We are not an identity provider. So Okta, actually Microsoft Entra ID is probably the biggest authentication provider. And part of authentication is multi-factor. So when I establish I am Tarun, or Aaron establishes he is Aaron, you can basically send an SMS or a push notification to my phone, and I will continue to prove user trust. So user trust is not something SonicWall does. We do device trust. So once you have attested to which user you are, we want to ensure you come from an approved device. So what SonicWall solution does is it puts a certificate on the device. It will score the device. It will make sure the device doesn't have any malware running on it. It will make sure the firewall is enabled, the operating system is up to date, it's running the right software. So it will provide device trust. And you need both. In a zero trust solution, you need user trust and device trust. And so SonicWall doesn't do the user trust piece. SonicWall only does the device trust piece. And yes, we do all the access policies, role-based access, attribute-based access. We actually do trust-based access as well, which is a real-time risk assessment. So all the sophisticated access policies are handled by SonicWall. But the identity piece, we expect a third-party identity provider like Microsoft or Okta or so on to do it. And then specifically, as it pertains to the controls, there are 4 types of controls. 5 types of controls that zero trust solutions can be used within a compliance framework. So the first one I mentioned was device trust. That's common in many, many compliance frameworks. The second one is least privilege access controls. Zero trust is a default deny system, only grant access based on roles, based on attributes to specific users. A zero trust solution provides that comprehensive audit trail. So all network activity, all authentication activity is logged and can be used for audit purposes. A zero trust solution is continuous, so it's doing it in real time. Oftentimes, many solutions will allow you to authenticate once and then check only 24 hours and 48 hours later. That's just too long in today's threat landscape. And the last one is threat protection. As I mentioned, you block malicious websites. So I'll just pause there, Aaron. In your experience, how are you using zero trust? What kind of technologies, vendors that you work with, and how do they help you with compliance?
With zero trust, first off with compliance, across the board with all the vendors we use, it's really dictated based on the client's environment and who they currently want to use. But it could be anything from the application layer on the endpoint. But when it comes to the cloud secure edge product, it's such in retrospect, it's next gen. It's efficiencies, right? And the way we look at it is just how from in the past, the environment's just changed. We've had enough time in here where, back in the day, Exchange was on-prem. All of our infrastructure was either in a data room or within a co-hosted, data center. And they built their stacks that way. And when the cloud came along, it doesn't matter if you're going straight cloud, if you're remote workforce, how many companies are on Office 365? Just that alone, right? Has really made a huge movement and a case for zero trust. And so when you're looking at efficiencies, what we're always looking for our customers, when you're trying to lower, the biggest bang for your effort, you want to go with something that is going to meet multiple regulations, have that control, the better security. As part of Peter's question with the multi-factor, I think one of the attributes, and maybe you can answer this for me, is that you can actually, with the device trust, ensure that somebody couldn't lift your credentials and your two-factor and still log into your portals, which is just fantastic, right? Like it gives you that extra layer of security. In some of our cases, I have clients that are on their roadmap to go completely SaaS and cloud.
Right.
That's it. One of the clients we're working with closely, longstanding relationship, and they've gone completely cloud and SaaS. Zero trust is a huge requirement for them because their complete workforce. Right before COVID, they had bought a building downtown Los Angeles, and it has never been occupied. They were moving everybody from another location. COVID hit. They went completely remote. They haven't gone back, and they've even moved to completely nationwide hiring. So this is extremely important for them. They have NIST requirements. They have PCI requirements, and having the ability to, like, even the secure gateway, least privilege access, and device trust is crucially important, because with compliance, it's about having a plan. It's about having a plan to fix the issues when there is an incident. And what you have to show as an individual within a compliant environment is that, for instance, if you're using for the web security aspects of it, the CASB, if you're going to blacklist something, right. Sometimes it's blacklisted for a particular reason, but it's still a use case for the business. So you have to have a policy to be able to whitelist it. And if and for that particular person. So if you have control of that, which this allows you to have control of, right, then you're doing your job correctly, right? It's not, compliance isn't always black and white. One of the audits that I sat in was reviewing how to break a policy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that back then when I discovered there's a policy for breaking policies. This is great. Like I blew my mind. But you have to think objectively to say not everything is bad necessarily. It has to just be controlled, and that's what zero trust gives you. That's what this is helping organizations do.
The way I'd say it is, if you have a zero trust security solution in place, you have thought about the security implications for a lot of compliance scenarios already. And so it becomes easier to say, yes, I'm compliant, and also to generate the audit trail to show that you're compliant. And that's where zero trust helps. We'll give you a specific example with PCI. I just want to come to the credential compromise that Peter brought up, which is most credential compromise attacks user trust. So what they're able to do is they're able to steal your username and password, and sometimes they're able to do a SIM swap. And so when they do a SIM swap is when they kind of steal your phone number. So they can also take over your MFA in some cases. And so they're able to really establish that they are you as a user. What SonicWall's solution does is device trust. So what we do essentially is put a certificate on the device, a cryptographic root of trust on the device, and then we're attesting to different aspects of the device posture. That is much harder to steal because you have to actually go physically steal the laptop. It's not just about going on the dark net and stealing your password. And so one alone is not enough. We strongly believe you need both. Establish user trust and establish device trust. And if you establish both before, say, you access a sensitive portal or before you sign up for your ERP software, it gets much harder to steal a credential and impersonate you. And part of zero trust is establishing device trust and user trust. And so that's a great way. It's a great security solution, and it's also a really good compliance initiative to accomplish it.
It's so incredibly important. One client, we do annual security baselining. We do OSINT. We find credentials on the dark web all the time. They were owned by a European entity. They're US based. They were procured here. And our testers somehow stumbled into the source code server repositories in Europe.
Wow.
Through just compromised credentials. And even though it just happened to crawl into scope because of the domain, our US-based clients were happy that it wasn't them. And the European population was very happy that they were made aware of it.
Right.
But having the SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge will help ensure that even with these credentials, we're not getting in. So that's
awesome. Let's answer one specific question that's come in, which is, what portions of various compliance standards does a zero trust security model help meet across the board? And now that's a very broad question, and fortunately I had prepared a couple of slides with some specific ones. So just again to recap, these are the controls that a zero trust solution will provide, and not just cloud security. There are other zero trust solutions on the market. Pretty much all of us will do device trust, access controls, visibility, continuous verification, and threat protection. So let's take an example of PCI DSS. This is a payment card industry. What does the DSS stand for? Data security, maybe?
Data security standard.
Data security standards. Okay. So say you had to be PCI DSS compliant. Now, PCI DSS essentially is 12 high-level criteria, each of them which has like 50, 20 sub-bullets under all of them. But let's just go over some of the high-level criteria. Install and maintain a firewall. That is something a zero trust solution will help you with. Now, you have to be clear that zero trust won't help you with every single one, like system passwords, stored data. Zero trust typically does not cover those. But transmission of that data, updating antivirus, keeping the endpoint security updated, zero trust will help you with that. Again, building secure systems is not a mandate for zero trust security, but restricting access to those systems is exactly what a zero trust solution will do. Providing unique identity, unique authentication, strong authentication for everyone accessing a resource is definitely in the mandate of zero trust. Physical access, that's not a zero trust security mandate. And if I just go through the list, out of about the 12 high-level controls that PCI DSS requires, 6 of them can be met and audited using a zero trust solution. So that's a pretty good bargain there. You buy one product, implement that product, it improves your overall security of your organization. And also when it comes to compliance time, half of your compliance controls are either met or audited using the product. And I think that's a pretty good return on investment there.
Absolutely. And I think to this point, we work with a lot of customers. We recommend GRC tools for governance, risk, and compliance in order to centralize their compliance and risk programs and their policies. But many of these tools have the ability to crosswalk these across different standards. So going back to that applicability comment I made earlier in the webinar, if you got ISO 27000 as your base and you want to crosswalk it across to HIPAA, PCR, or the others, a tool like that's going to make it really easy for you to actually see that this control meets these other requirements very quickly. Yeah. And so again, back to the efficiency comments. With Zero Trust, I mean, you got a lot of microsegmentation requirements that are being met. You also have, the ability to make sure your device is having the latest patch, disk encryption. You just want to ensure that everything that you have there in any program is identified, mapped, and maintained as you want to continue to kind of refine and work on the maturity, right? It's all about maturing your program, and a Zero Trust tool could really help you bring efficiency and to show your ability to quickly, go into some type of action and plan.
So this is 2025. We can't have a webinar without talking about some AI. And you mentioned GRC tools. So what do you think the impact of AI is going to be on these GRC tools? You think at some point you can just tell the AI, hey, these are my vendors, this is my logs, go fill out all these forms, and magically some AI agent will go do all these things for us?
I think to some degree AI is going to already support a lot of what organizations do with their GRC. Obviously, it could be a coach. It could quickly bring to light where your gaps are and give you guidance in respects to ways that you could easily meet the requirements. It's more of an assistant at this time. Mm-hmm. In the future, I think time will tell how far they'll allow it to go. But anything they do would have to be in a secure manner with the AI, and you just want to make sure that whatever information AI touches obviously isn't going to be, anybody but yours at the end of the day. I'm fascinated to see where AI takes us in the future. My mind blows with like AI, quantum computing coming. They talk about so many things in the future that I'm excited to see what it holds.
Yeah, I think at least with the AI tools I've played with in, say, the PCI, you can just feed the PCI PDF up into AI, and then you can start asking it questions. And so I think it's a real productivity enhancer. One of the most painful things for me in a compliance audit is filling out forms, just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions. And it's just mentally taxing. Go through each question, read the question, answer the question. And I think where AI is a real productivity enhancer is that it can fill out a lot of these forms for you. If you just feed in the right attributes. But at the end of the day, compliance is a risk mitigation exercise. It's still your neck on the line. If something goes wrong, AI isn't going to stand up and say, hey, I filled out that questionnaire. So you still have to read what the AI has written. It better be accurate. Otherwise, it's your neck on the line there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would venture to say, use it as a productivity, check its work always.
Yeah. And that's how, and I think that's very powerful. It really, there's a huge inertia. I don't know, Aaron, if you've, every time I see a PDF, a Excel spreadsheet with 10 tabs and 50 questions on each tab, my brain just explodes. Mm-hmm. Feed the Excel spreadsheet to AI, feed the PDF to AI, let it answer something. It's a weight lifted off my shoulders. It's a good place to get started, but I don't think it's the final answer yet.
I think with the GRC tools today, definitely take you off the spreadsheets. AI's being implemented to some degree and as an enhancer. Some of the newer guys I've seen out there that aren't necessarily, the Archer size or the ServiceNow size, but they're making it a point to put in guidance, helps, videos within these GRC tools to really help organizations become more efficient and learn. It's really about learning ways to navigate through your compliance program and just overall, crush it at the end of the day. When you have to submit reports, go under audit, you just want to feel very confident that you have everything to hand over as quickly as possible. Just as if you go with SOC 2 and you want to show your customers you can rely on us to manage your data and be integral with everything we do, without having to have them snoop through every spreadsheet and everything you do. That's what our GRC tool would do for anybody's program.
Awesome. And just one last, just following up on that question on mapping zero trust to a specific compliance standard. So we covered PCI, and I just want to cover a slightly different one, which is a little bit more technical, a little bit more, I would say, maybe architecture oriented as opposed to a very specific practice, and that's the NIST standard. And the NIST standard, it's SP 800-207. It's an architecture document. It's a very dense document, but the great thing about NIST is they have some really strong security researchers that go down to fundamental concepts, and they write out, hey, in an ideal world with the modern threats, this is what you need to put in place for your organization to be secure. And they literally call out a zero trust architecture with, resource portal models and trust algorithms and cross-enterprise collaboration, a bunch of, I would say, fairly complicated concepts. And one thing, this was released 3 or 4 years ago. So one of the cool things in our space is zero trust at some point was just a buzzword, but today it has been operationalized in many easy-to-use products. So as a compliance person, or even as a security IT professional, you could go skim this, but you should also kind of rest easy in knowing that folks like me, we've read all of this and we've put it all into our products. So a product like SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge is actually built on these very same architecture principles. So you don't have to go learn about what an enclave gateway model is unless you really want to. You can just purchase one of these products and you know that you're going to have a NIST compliant architecture. And that, I think, is very powerful. It's really cool to see, when we started in this space, zero trust was just a buzzword. Nobody had anything. But over the last few years, it's become so relevant that a lot of products have just incorporated these concepts. And so you don't need to know the gory details of how these things work. That's one of the really gratifying things about working in this space now.
Yeah, I'm amazed about how NIST puts out so much documentation on all these different standards, frameworks, OWASP as well. You could go out there on the web and really comb through and find a lot of information. If anybody is in a just getting started in information security, you have so much documentation to comb through. Now, yeah, you could glaze over on some of this, but it's there available, ready for you to learn and to really understand the meaning and the principles behind these standards, because it really is important to understand, like, if you're buying a solution out there, is it aligning with what these organizations are telling us are the most important attributes of zero trust, right? And so if you want to learn more, I'd recommend going to NIST website and start with 853, understand the control sets, their relation to CSF and other standards, or CMMC, and just kind of get your mind going. But for me, it's all about opportunity. So if you're being driven towards something like PCI, there you go. You're going to learn it as you go through the assembly and the implementation of that information security program.
Awesome. It's time to wrap. So maybe I'll just answer one last question here, which is, does SonicWall has a SOC and an MDR solution? Does it also have a SIM SOAR? So SIM is like a logging tool for security events, incident event manager, and SOAR is a security operations to do playbooks. The main answer here is the SOC and MDR solution actually do include a SIM and a SOAR. It's not a separate solution. SonicWall a year or so ago purchased a company called Solutions Granted, which under the hood has a SOC, an MDR, a SIM, and a SOAR, and it's all it's now been rebranded. I should know this. It now has a SonicWall brand name, but it's all included in the same solution. So you can send all your logs, not just your EDR logs. When you send your endpoint security logs, it's called MDR, Managed Detection and Response. But you can actually send your network logs. The solution also pulls in your authentication logs from Office 365. You can send your CSE logs. And so all the correlation, as well as the follow-up playbooks, as well as the breach detection, as well as the remediation, is done in one platform. I have some demos on YouTube, and if I have a moment, I'll share a link to it. But that's all integrated into one solution that SonicWall has. It's not a cloud secure edge offering. It's not our zero trust offering. It's more our SOC as a service offering, which is monitoring and management. But yes, that is there as well. And on that note, Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Thank you, audience, for answering the poll questions and having so many interesting conversation topics. Really appreciate it. You can reach both of us offline as well. Our profiles are pretty public. We look forward to hearing from you.